Into your hand I commit my spirit. Psalms 31. In you, O Lord, do I take refuge. Let me never be put to shame. In your righteousness deliver me. Incline your ear to me. Rescue me speedily. Be a rock of refuge for me, a strong fortress to save me. For you are my rock and my fortress, and for your name's sake you lead me and guide me. You take me out of the net that they have hidden for me, for you are my refuge. Into your hand I commit my spirit. You have redeemed me, O Lord, faithful God. I hate those who pay regard to worthless idols, but I trust in the Lord. I will rejoice and be glad in your steadfast love, because you have seen my affliction. You have known the distress of my soul, and you have not delivered me into the hand of the enemy. You have set my feet in a broad place. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eye is wasted from grief, my soul and my body also. For my life is spent with sorrow, and my years with sighing. My strength fails because of my iniquity, and my bones waste away. Because of all my adversaries I have become a reproach, especially to my neighbors, and an object of dread to my acquaintances. Those who see me in the street flee from me. I have been forgotten like one who is dead. I have become like a broken vessel, for I hear the whispering of many, terror on every side. As they scheme together against me, as they plot to take my life. But I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hand. Rescue me from the hand of my enemies and from my persecutors. Make your face shine on your servant. Save me in your steadfast love. O Lord, let me not be put to shame, for I call upon you. Let the wicked be put to shame. Let them go silently to Sheol. Let the lying lips be mute, which speak insolently against the righteous in pride and contempt. Oh, how abundant is your goodness, which you have stored up for those who fear you, and worked for those who take refuge in you, in the sight of the children of mankind. In the cover of your presence you hide them from the plots of men. You store them in your shelter from the strife of tongues. Blessed be the Lord, for he has wondrously shown his steadfast love to me when I was in a besieged city. I had said in my alarm, I am cut off from your sight. But you heard the voice of my pleas for mercy when I cried to you for help. Love the Lord, all you his saints. The Lord preserves the faithful, but abundantly repays the one who acts in pride. Be strong and let your heart take courage, all you who wait for the Lord.
Well, good morning, Liberty. You are my family, and I'm staring out at an empty room, and I miss seeing your faces. I miss hearing you sing. I miss hearing us be together in our gathered bodily form. And I'm hoping that right now we can just agree with one another that we're never going to get used to this. And that God met the need of this world by coming to us in a bodily form and calling us into a body where we're to be together in bodily form, and that this is not a new convenience, but that this is a concession and a compromise for the sake of a greater good. And I'm really looking forward when we can be face to face in the flesh with one another again. Everybody at Liberty right now should be signing up to be a part of a prayer pod. You can go to our website and sign up on one of the many Slack channels that we have there and belong to one of those channels, and then organize when and how you want to pray. And the instructions for getting going on that are posted on our website. So I hope that you'll take that seriously and really rise to this occasion by praying for our nation with other saints. I think you guys know me. You know that I'm not a camera guy. I'm already breaking my boundaries by being in front of a camera, so I'm setting new boundaries. No makeup. I'm not doing any makeup. But I would hate to miss this opportunity to encourage you guys from the Scriptures. As we react to all of these events that are going on around us, that shatter our illusion of being in control, it's really good to think about how we want to go through this right now on the front end of it, because we really don't know what we're looking at. And whether it's going to be a short-lived thing or a long-lived thing, and what it's going to mean for our lives and for our nation as a whole. And so now's the time to determine in our hearts that we're going to journey through this with believing confidence in our God and not be like believers who act like unbelievers. And so this morning we're going to do some work out of Psalm 31 and just follow a man of faith through this psalm who is facing a personal crisis that is way out of his control. So I'm going to grab my Bible. I'll be back here in just a few moments. Yep, I left it. I don't have it with me. And this is not a performance, so you're seeing my humanness come out, so give me a quick second. All right, I am back. I titled this message, The Usefulness of Trouble. The psalm is written by David, but there's no superscript telling us the exact historical situation. Nonetheless, it takes us into some very dark and disturbing circumstances that he faced and how he was working that out in his own soul's relationship with God. You know, and you can look at little bits and fragments of this psalm, like plots to take my life, or forgotten like one who is dead, or terror on every side, or friends running away from me, or whatever. Like that's not the language of an easy life, but someone who is on the verge of being wrecked by the wrongdoing of others. And so rather than play detective and try to go back and fish around for the exact historical scenario, what I want to do is just focus on the outcomes that grew out of his distress. You know, nobody likes trouble. Nobody's signing up for trouble, lining up for trouble. Trouble to us just feels like a big stinking pile of manure that we have to go wading through. And we don't want to have to wade through it. And now we do. But big stinking piles of manure, they make really good fertilizer for good things to grow. And so we're going to look at that. What was growing and arising out of his trouble? And I think the most obvious one to any reader is trust. You know, trouble gives us a chance to take our trust to the next level with God. And we see David doing that. We see David running to God with his trust when trouble touches his life. You know, he says things like, "In you, O Lord, do I take refuge," or "You are my rock," or "Into your hand I commit my spirit," or "I hate those who pay regard to worthless idols, but I trust in you, and my times are in your hand." Those are all different assertions of his trust. You know, and we can say, we can all say we trust in God. But some of us can really be building our lives on top of another foundation while we say that. And those crisis times have a way of exposing our true foundation, especially when all of those other secondary supports, they get kicked out from under us, when human love fails us, when the money dries up, when my body betrays me and tells me I'm not invincible, when all of the conveniences that I'm used to that empower my efficiency and productivity are suddenly not there, like then our trust gets to go out on a limb with God a little bit and be put on the line some. You know, 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 6 and 7, and you can look that up, it tells us that sometimes God counts it necessary to test our faith with trouble, so that our faith can really result, he says, in praise and honor and glory for you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. And so we see a couple of ways that David is putting his trust on display. One of those ways is that he's just throwing himself onto God in prayer. I mean, trouble can be of great value to prayer and provoke a whole lot more praying. And that's not always a bad thing if it gets us to engage God a little more intensely with some prayerful reliance and desperation for Him. Maybe that's where we always needed to be. See, that's the problem, is when we have it too easy and too good for too long, we forget how vulnerable we really are. And we lose perspective on God as my all the time most urgent need. And trouble has a way of snapping that back into focus. And so we see him throwing himself onto God in prayer. And it's really in prayer that we project our trust out onto God. I mean, trust is like prayer is like the currency our trust trades in. Prayer is like the train tracks that our trust runs on. But there's another way that I see trust happening in this psalm, and that's the way David is taking his stand on the truths that he's already believed, what God has already said about who God always is in the lives of his people. And that's what you do. That's what you do when you face a future that feels fearful to you, is that you fall back on those revealed truths that you've already believed, and you dig into those. And I mean dig into those with your trust. And so we see David doing that. We see in verse 1, he mentions the righteousness of God. That's really a statement about God's character. We see in verse 3 how he mentions the leadership of God. We see in verse 16 how he mentions the unfailing love of God. And then in verse 15, how he mentions the control of God in his very own life. When he says, "My times are in your hand." My life is not getting ricocheted around by a whole bunch of random occurrences that God is absent from, or events that are happening to me separate from God working, or separate from God caring, or separate from God knowing, but that my times are in His hands, and He never takes those hands off of me. He's not left me. He never loses control of me, and that His love and that His leadership are still on the job in my life, even though I can't see it right now. And so I'm not going to walk by what my eyes are telling me. I'm not going to walk by what my feelings are saying to me, but I'm going to live by what God has already said about who God always is in the lives of His people. And I'm going to dig into that with stubborn trust. And so that's one of those outcomes that really emerges from his trouble. It gives him a chance to take his trust to the next level. You know, Jesus had to do that. You know, it says in Hebrews that Jesus learned obedience through the things that He suffered. That means that each new thing that Jesus suffered, He had to meet that with trust and take His trust to that next level. The sinless Son of God had to learn obedience through the things that He suffered. Another outcome I see emerging out of this is the way trouble sets up opportunity for God to act and for God to intervene in ways that are personal to our situation, where His strength really works best in our weakness, and He comes close to us in our distress and proves to be the waymaker and the life supporter and the difference doer that He is. I think it's in 2 Chronicles, the eyes of the Lord, they run to and fro throughout the earth, looking to show Himself a strong support on behalf of those whose hearts are loyal to Him, right? Whose hearts have believing loyalty, invested in who He is, and He loves to prove Himself faithful to them in those dark times. God likes to be trusted. You know, if you were to put your trust in me, you're putting your trust in a very finite person who slams against his creaturely limitations and his fallenness all the time in a way that will disappoint any absolute trust that would ever be put in me. But when you're trusting in an infinite God, Liberty, you have never reached the bottom of what He can do with those who come to Him in loving trust. You know, sometimes we pray, God, I want more of You in my life. Have you ever prayed that? I've prayed that. God, I want more of You. I want more God. I want more God poured into my life. It's a great prayer. So where do we go to get more God in our life? Well, where do you go to watch whales? You want to go see a whale? Where do you go to watch a whale? You go to Wisconsin? Do you go to Lake Sakakawea? Where do you go? No, you go to Maine. Or you go to Oregon, or you go to Nova Scotia to see a whale. So where do you go to get more God in your life, or to see more of God in your life? Well, you go through difficult times. That's where you go. And you reach a place where you're okay with God sending you into difficult things that force you to face your fears, and at the same time set up opportunity for Him to show Himself a strong support on your behalf. We all like the sound of resurrection, right? Doesn't resurrection sound wonderful? I mean, that's God's power. That's demonstrable displays of the supernatural, and it's exciting. Yeah, I'm all about this God of resurrection. But what we forget is that resurrection follows crucifixion, and without crucifixion there is no resurrection. So if we want more of this God of resurrection in our life, and we want to see more of the risen life of Jesus big in us and obvious to us and visible in us, then we have to be at peace with some crucified circumstances. Because resurrection follows crucifixion, and trouble just sets that up, and it sets the stage for you to have a living experience with the living God. Not to know that He's faithful because someone else said so, or you read it from somewhere, or He's rumored, but to know His faithfulness because you had a living experience with the living God. Now, the third outcome that emerges out of David's trouble is the natural corollary to God working. And that's us worshiping. That's us worshiping. Right? When God does things in the here and now in a way that's faith strengthening to us, or unforgettable to us, or meaningful to us, it produces a fresh outburst of praise. And I see that going on there in verse 21. He says, "Blessed be the Lord." And in verse 19, "Oh, how abundant is your goodness." And in verse 7, "I will rejoice and be glad in your steadfast love." Right? This is hot off the press praise. Right? A new wave of worship rising up from His mouth. He put a new song in my mouth. That kind of praise. See, what is it that you see right now? What is it that you see right now? You're hearing leaders talk about, how we're staring into the abyss. Or maybe what you see is fear, or you see joblessness, or where's provision going to come from, and how long is my life going to be on hold, and am I going to be able to get back to the plan that I was working, or is that plan over for good and I'm going to have to reinvent myself and go through all the expense and uncertainty of reinventing myself, right? And that's what we see. But what if God sees a great wave of thanksgiving and worship rising up to Him as heaven multiplies all of these God sightings in the midst of the chaos and the craziness? As we throw ourselves onto Him in prayerful dependence and in prayerful desperation. And that naturally bridges right into the final and fourth outcome that emerges out of this psalm. And it's right there in verse 23 and verse 24. You now have a testimony on your tongue of God's faithfulness to you to encourage other saints with. Love the Lord, all you His saints. The Lord preserves the faithful, but abundantly repays the one who acts in pride. Be strong. Let your heart take courage, all you who wait for the Lord. See, because David goes on to tell the rest of the story in verse 22 when he says, I said in my alarm, I'm cut off from your sight, but you heard the voice of my pleas for mercy when I cried to you for help. He has a first-hand basis to encourage other saints with. There was grace from God that got me through this, and so there's going to be grace from God to get you through this. You know, a lot of times when we think about testimony, what do we think about? We think about, the story of how I came to Jesus, the story of how I came to a saving knowledge of God's Son. And sometimes we reduce testimony down to that. But don't you want testimonies after you come to Jesus? Of how God moved in immovable-like situations, or how God revealed, or how God supported, or how God provided, or how God rescued, or how God delivered? God doing things for you in the here and now as you follow Jesus by faith in the here and now? And that's what David has now. He has a story to tell of God's faithfulness to him that can inject strength and inject hope into others that are in hard straits and having to wait on God in the way he had to wait on God. And that's ultimately that's where this whole psalm leads. It kind of begins with trouble, but it ends with testimony. But those aren't guaranteed outcomes. I don't think any of these outcomes are guaranteed. How useful our trouble is really determined by how we choose to receive our trouble. And will we meet God in it with loving trust and run to God with our loving trust? Because if we do, then we can count on God's loving support. And His working will invigorate our worship, and it will put a testimony on our tongue, and we'll have a first-hand way of encouraging other saints with. It's the story of this psalm, and it can be your story and it can be my story as we face an unknown future right now that feels uneasy and ambiguous, and for some of us, fearful.